I am now excited and honored to introduce your commencement speaker. It is extremely fitting that John Dickerson will be addressing you today. In a news environment that is not always objective, John has always been a steadfast protector and champion of the truth, with an unwavering commitment to honor and integrity in his work. A CBS News chief political analyst, senior national correspondent, and CBS Sunday Morning contributor, John recently published his third book and second New York Times bestseller, The Hardest Job in the World, The American Presidency. He is also a contributing writer to The Atlantic, co-host of Slate's podcast, Political Gabfest, and host of the podcast, Whistle Stop. John started his career with Time magazine, covering economics, Congress, and the first of what would become 7 presidential campaigns. His influence on the news and politics of the day grew to make him one of the nation's most respected analysts as he took on leading roles as the co-anchor of CBS This Morning, anchor of Face the Nation, and chief Washington correspondent of CBS News. John has also been a contributor for 60 Minutes while serving as the network's lead political analyst. A recipient of the Ford Prize for Distinguished Reporting on the Presidency and the David Broder Award for Political Reporting, John is known for his pioneering use of social media. I highly recommend that you join the 2 million Twitter followers at J. Dickerson, who trust John for his smart take on our ever-changing news cycle. Ladies and gentlemen, please join me in welcoming your 2022 commencement speaker, John Dickerson.
I've written a lot of words, but I don't think I've ever done anything as powerful as that performance. That was amazing. Thank you, Dr. Basoki, for that introduction. Thank you to the Board of Trustees, to President Repillette. Good morning, everybody. To all the professors of Kean, congratulations to you. Thank you. Thank you for the profession you chose and the way in which you carried it out with the care and dedication that you did. To the parents who are here today, who I can't see, but who are up in all of those high seats, who sacrificed and worried, I'm called to quote Mark Shields, a political commentator, who when he retired from the PBS NewsHour, he said that the lesson his parents had taught him that was the most important lesson is that we are all warmed by fires that we did not light, and we all drink from wells that we did not dig. That's a lesson parents teach just by being parents. And to the class of 2022, congratulations. This only happens once, so please give it up for yourselves again. As John Baptiste says, I love you even though I don't know you. And to commemorate that, if you would please put on your best faces. Thank you. I'm honored to try to come up with some words to match this day. It's also quite daunting, having listened to the work that all of you all have done. Being a journalist is a little bit like getting a master's degree or doctoral degree because you spend a lot of time alone. You spend a lot of time trying to stay engaged with a lot of confusing world out there, trying to peck at you and keep you from trying to figure out what you really think. And it can seem lonesome. And so I know what all of you have been through to get to this moment, and so I feel an obligation to match the weight of all your hard work. In addition to writing this speech, I'm also writing a graduation commencement for my daughter's high school class. She's graduating, going on to college, and so I've been reflecting about the difference in your worldview when you're 18 and your worldview, which is a little bit more seasoned you might remember how you felt when you were 18 when you were getting advice from your parents. There's a natural skepticism that comes with advice that comes from your parents, and it reminds me of the story of a British member of Parliament. The member of Parliament had just been elected to his seat, and it was the very first time that he was going to stand up and make a speech in front of all the other fellow lawmakers. And when he stood up to say his first words, right before he started talking, a member of the opposition stood up and yelled, "Resign!" So I'm glad no one has yelled that yet. It has always been the case that the previous generation looks at the generation that came before with skepticism. This has been the case since the beginning of time. In ancient Greece, there was a general named Pericles who was a big deal. He was a general in Greece. It's a big deal. And there was a much younger general, about 30 years younger, Alcibiades. And Alcibiades didn't think the older general knew what he was doing. And he was telling him this at some length about all the mistakes Pericles had made. And Pericles said, "You know, Alcibiades, when I was your age, I spoke the way you do." And Alcibiades shot back and said, "Oh, I should have liked to have known you in your prime." So I approach this with humility. And I come to you not in my own voice, but in the voice of people I've interviewed over 30 years. Actors, musicians, scientists, generals, a lot of politicians. So my plan today is to give you an address in 3 acts. The first act will be about meaning. The second act will offer some advice from the people I've interviewed. And the final act will be about the world that you enter. The first thing I want to talk about is meaning. Today is not just a turnstile you pass through. It's a day of meaning. What does that mean? Well, it's that feeling you got on your skin when you maybe heard the bagpipes earlier or when you heard the Star-Spangled Banner get sung. It's a day that we think about and reflect on where we are in life for ourselves, for our communities, and we try and make sense of it all. It's a day for big thoughts. What gives us purpose? Why do we do what we do? Any way you look, there's meaning. If you look back, today calls us to make meaning of reaching this milestone, to draw conclusions about hard work, all that sacrifice, the second job, the third job to get you here to today, and the hope that you invested in a far-off dream. That's what making meaning is if you look in the past. If you look in the future, you try and make meaning about what kind of advice is useful for this adventure you're about to go ahead. And your parents are out there making big meaning because they're thinking about you when you were a little baby and all the path that you've been through since then, or where they were when they were this age. Or for a lot of you, they're thinking about you are the first person to reach this milestone in their family and all the struggle that has come before to reach that milestone. Dan Pink, who's an author who just wrote a book about the topic of regret, a bestseller, he came up with the idea for that book while he was at his daughter's graduation. It's a day of big meaning. But what happens in these days of big meaning is you have a revelation. You feel an entire year come down into one day, and then life gets busy, you move on. You don't stay in touch with meaning in the same way that this ceremony makes us think about it today. So I'm going to offer you a habit. And the habit is just this. On a regular basis, just ask yourself, am I being who I want to be right now? If we think about today's ceremony, the reason it feels so right is that we can all answer that question, yes. We feel we are doing what we are supposed to do at this very moment and being the people we want to be. And that feels good. When your actions and your values are aligned together, that's meaningful. So if you ask this question, you make it a habit, you think about these ideas more than just on a day like today, that's what I'm suggesting. And this idea isn't something I just pulled out of my ear. It comes from a phone call I've been lucky enough to be on for the last couple of years. It takes place once a month. And the people on this Zoom call are the people who live lives of the kind that you someday will. They are leaders in education, in business, in the theater. And the call was put together by a guy named Marshall Goldsmith. He's an executive coach, and he's coached some of the most renowned executives all over the globe. He's written a number of books that are bestsellers as well, and his latest book is called The Earned Life, and it's about this topic, how you can achieve something that is not only a big deal in everybody else's eyes, but that is meaningful for you. So I've been on these calls, and the participants in these calls, what they do is they bring puzzles in their life to get the advice of other people who are leaders in their fields. A lot of times it's practical stuff. How do I deal with a board of directors? But more often than not, the puzzles are the ones about meaning. How do I most effectively use my talents? What drives me? How can I put more of my energy towards what feeds my soul? And this search for meaning has led some of these leaders to ask their employees to go through exercises that help them find meaning. So one of the things they do is they ask a new employee to write the speech, even though they're a new employee, to write the speech that they want to hear given at their retirement party. Or they ask people to write the eulogy they would like delivered for them. And the whole point of these exercises is to give people perspective, to force a person to think about what is a meaningful life. And when you look way into the future, then you can start authoring that meaningful life now. And more often than not, these leaders on this call come back to this simple daily practice, which is asking themselves, in the moment, am I being who I want to be right now? So you can do this in little ways. Let's say you're in an argument, you're arguing with somebody, you're just waiting for the moment where they take a breath so you can jump in there and prove how right you are. If you stop and say, am I being the person I want to be right now, you might think, no, let me treat this person with more empathy. Let me open myself up to what they may be saying. And even if I don't agree with them, let me treat them with dignity. Of course, you can ask this question in gargantuan ways too. When I sit down at my office, am I being the person I want to be right now? That can mean everything from, is this the firm I want to work for, the job I want, the city I want, the profession I want? These are big questions. You can't solve those in an afternoon. But asking yourself this question regularly, staying in touch with it, making it a habit, helps you build a system for coming up with the answers to those large questions over time. When I was invited here today, my assignment was to give thoughts and reflections on student empowerment and transition in a quickly evolving environment. Well, if you ask yourself, am I being who I want to be right now? That immediately helps you find clarity in transitions. And asking this question gives you steadiness in an environment that is quickening faster and faster than before. There are 4 reasons to ask this question. The first, it helps you make choices and sort decisions. That's always been an issue. Those of you who have had to live your life while trying to get your degrees, you know what it's like to make decisions and choices. There are lots of them, and there seem to be more and more of them every day. So when faced with a choice and you make a decision, you can ask yourself, would the person I want to be make the choice this way? Will making the choice put me in a situation where I'm the person I want to be? Inside of whatever answer you come up with, there will be a why you chose to be this person. And each time you sort a choice, you're having a conversation between your values and your ego. Using this as a habit helps you find the contours of yourself, discover your edges, construct a value system, an emotional, ethical architecture for keeping this search for meaning present in your life. The second reason to ask this question is that when they say happiness is a choice, optimism is a choice, answering this question in the moment, that's how you make happiness a choice. This is when you make that choice. Am I the person I want to be? I want to be an optimistic person. You can choose that if you ask yourself this question. Now, who knows what joy will mean for you? It might mean working late at night, fishing on the weekend, reading until you forget that you haven't had dinner. But if you ask this question, you will note when the answer is yes. And that'll be moments sometimes of wonder and joy. And you'll conclude, I want to do more of those activities, and you'll arrange your life so that there will be more moments when you say yes. And in those really hard moments, where you are not where you want to be, but you're doing it for some larger purpose, when you ask this question, you'll remember what that larger purpose is. And a lot of you in this audience have already had to do that, getting to where you are right now. The third reason to ask this question is that after you graduate, there won't be any more grades, which I'm sure is a delight to many of you. Give it up for no more grades. But the problem is, how will you measure yourself? How will you know you're on the right path? And if you're not on the right path, how will you adapt? So grades, as much of a nightmare as they do provide a structure. So you now are the authors of your own structure. Am I the person I want to be right now? That's a little structure when those grades go away. And the worst thing, though, is if you go out into the world and you are graded. And the grading system out in the world, as many of you already know, it can be quite arbitrary. If you're a teacher, you will be graded on student performance on tests that don't measure whether you've really taught them anything. If you're in business, you'll learn about stock prices based on consensus earnings estimates. If you're in civilization, you'll be told it's the number and kind of cars, handbags, tailored shirts, watches that you should own that determine your value as a person. And if you don't know this, a salesman will be with you shortly. None of these systems of grades push you towards purpose and meaning. But if you choose a system of meaning, as provisional and messy as it's going to be, it helps you from linking your sense of yourself to your job or your possessions. Avoid having your ego so close to your position, said Colin Powell, that when your position falls, your ego goes with it. My favorite story about not letting other people set the agenda for you comes from baseball. Hank Aaron was at plate. He was playing for the Milwaukee Braves, and he was up at bat, and the catcher for the opposing team, the New York Yankees, Yogi Berra, was trying to get in his head. He was trying to distract him, so he kept saying, "Hank, turn the bat so you can read the label on it." Aaron wasn't doing it. He said, "Hank, turn the bat so you can read the label on it." And Aaron finally shot back, "I didn't come up here to read. I came up here to hit." So when you might be tempted to give in to someone else's plan for you, just remember, you didn't come up here to read, you came here to hit. The final reason to ask yourself this question, am I being the person I want to be right now, is based on the principle articulated by Snoop Dogg. Stay ready, don't have to get ready. Life is full of surprises. You didn't expect Snoop Dogg. So life is full of surprises. Some are really good. You get a new job offer that comes out of nowhere. If you have asked yourself this question, you've built a system for taking in that new challenge, that new offer. You're already having this conversation with yourself about what you want, where you want to go, who you want to be. That lands inside of an architecture that exists already. And this architecture also helps when life knocks you off your feet. We're all emerging from one of those moments. During COVID, time and again, I interviewed people who'd either lost a loved one or were just trying to hold it together in lockdown, or who were reevaluating their lives in the light of this new destabilizing period. If you think about these questions of meaning regularly, when these moments come and knock you off your feet, you're ready for it. Stay ready, you don't have to get ready. So, to review, ask this question to sort choices, find joy, grade yourself, and stay ready. Act 2, this is the advice part. These are things that people have told me or that I figured out doing interviews all these years. So the first one is let yourself off the hook. So when you ask yourself, am I the person I want to be right now? Don't let the answer get too big. Keep it really small. The point of making this a daily habit is you turn it into an exercise, like prayer or meditation or working out. The gains happen when you do it a little bit every day. Carry this question with you like a nickel in your pocket. The most important thing is taking this question with you. Second piece of advice is watch the headlights. One way to be easy on yourself is don't rush to answer questions you aren't facing yet. Answer the questions that are in front of you. One of the best metaphors for life I've ever heard came from the writer E.L. Doctorow, who said that writing a novel is like driving a car at night. You can see only so far as the headlights, but you can make the whole trip that way. By all means, dream and dream big. But you don't have to see the path to your ultimate dream destination to get there. You just have to see 2 or 3 feet ahead of you. 3, if you love your job, you will work. As you enter the working world, those of you who haven't already been in it for a long time, you might get this piece of advice laid on you, which is from Mark Twain. He says, find a job you love and you will never work a day in your life. I don't think that's right. Pardon me, Samuel Clemens, Mark Twain. I think taking that advice to heart could cause you to look for something that doesn't exist on this planet. Work you love requires work. There is a partnership between love and worry and work. If you love something, you will worry. And the way to dispel that worry is work. Work is the application of care and concern to worry. And if you are ambitious, you will have self-doubt, and that is hot worry. Cool it down with work. This is how you make your nervous system your ally and not your enemy. If you hear a voice within you saying you are no painter, then paint by all means, lad, and that voice will be silenced, but only by working. That's Vincent van Gogh. So I don't think Twain's advice is right. I think the advice is seek a vocation that is worth your work and your worry. Final couple of pieces of advice about risk. A lot of people talk about risk at this stage in your life and in these kinds of speeches. And I never really understood, they say take a risk, you must take a risk, fine. But then you never know quite what that means. So I spent half a year interviewing people who take risks. Mountain climbers, people who started companies, generals, musicians. Here's what I learned. First, understand what a risk is. A Marine colonel told me they were taught as Marines the difference between a risk and a gamble. You can get out of a risk if it goes wrong. A gamble, if it's a bad outcome, there's no going back. So a risk is joining a startup or paying to produce your own album. A gamble is getting behind the wheel when you've had too much to drink. Next thing about risk, leap on yes. So taking risks is good because it puts you at your limits. And when you're at your limits, you discover things that are true. But how do you find the limit? Well, if you're asking, am I the person I want to be right now? And the answer comes back no enough times, you'll probably have a pretty good idea where the limit is and what the person looks like who can say yes. They'll be really close to you. Well, go leap on yes. Go leap and be that person. They're right there. You've been asking this question. You know how close it is to get to yes. Because you've asked this question, it's not going to be a wild leap. You'll know why you took the leap, and that's the key thing. You've been asking yourself this question. You know why you're taking the leap, which means you'll have some nourishment when you carry out the risk, because what they don't tell you when they say take a risk is that after you take the risk, it's really hard. But he who has a why to live for can bear almost any how. And let me add a little fact that you can investigate with your lives. The author Dan Pink, he's the one I mentioned earlier who came up with the book about regret while he was at his daughter's graduation. In his book on regret, he studied the social science research, and he found that regrets were stronger among people who didn't take a leap in a specific instance in their life. That was a stronger regret than the regret from people who did take a leap and failed. The pain from imagining the success you might have had if you took that leap is greater than the pain that you feel if you take a risk and you fall on your face. The final part about risk. Down climbing is a part of climbing. One of the people I interviewed was a mountain climber who, he and his partner go to places that no human has ever gone before and climb 4,000, 5,000, 6,000 feet in the air and put up roots where no human being has ever been before. His name is Eli Simon, and he told me a story about one night they were about 3,500 feet in the air. It was pitch black. They'd been climbing because the weather moved quickly, so once you get an open window, you have to keep climbing. They'd been up there about 20 hours. All they could see was the little pinpoint of light ahead of their headlamp going straight up in the ice and rock. And they, after about 20 hours, they reached a head wall. Now, a head wall is so much ice and rock they can't get around it. So it was cold, wet, climbing all day, and they reached a head wall. At which point, if I were narrating the story, I would have said, and that's when we died. But Eli told the story this way. The story of getting blocked in the dark 20 hours of climbing in the cold. He said, and so we came to a head wall, and down climbing is a part of climbing, so we down climbed a few hundred feet and found another way to ascend. And then he went on to tell the story. They made it to the top. He lived and was able to be interviewed by me. He described the prospect of spending hours more climbing back down, that's what down climbing is, and then having to go up again. He described that whole process like it was as difficult as changing a t-shirt. It was not. But because he had this mindset, he didn't freak out at the obstacle. They didn't get reckless or rush. They approached their journey with the recognition that the route is never straight. Down climbing is a part of climbing. The route is never straight. if you build that into your mindset as a normal feature and don't see setbacks as proof of your cosmic unworthiness, you will climb. Humanity is won, wrote Ralph Ellison, by continuing to play in the face of certain defeat. I hope some of that might have been useful for this next chapter in your life, but I also hope that you find what I say today useful because we really, really need you. A door is opened and let in the future, and it is an edgy future. We face complex challenges of climate change and racial justice and education and economic inequality and a continued readjustment across American life after the pandemic. And across the world, all the stitchings come undone. And because we're all interconnected, when stitches pop overseas, that affects us here. The future is here, and it's a troubling one. And so we need your passion. We need your vision. We need your questions. We need your fresh energy to attack these problems and to shore up our communities and help us all find a way in this transition in society. But we need you for another reason: to stand on the side of knowable things. Can I get a witness? Old truths and institutions are weaker than they once were. Leaders have failed us, the amount of information and choice has confused us, and there are some bad actors who create chaos in order to sell their brand of order. This means our shared foundations, the stage on which we all used to stand, that allow us to make progress. That's the same foundation that your learning is based on. Those shared foundations have been made weaker. In this environment, expertise, which is what your diplomas testify that you have, is under attack. The process of gathering information, analyzing it, and then drawing a conclusion that might be studied or refuted for the purposes of learning, that's all under question right now. We saw this at the height of the pandemic when medical and public health experts offering the best information they had at the time had to fight through skepticism and misinformation. People who should know better pushed treatments that had no basis in science at the cost of lives, including alternatives to life-saving vaccines. We see the same trends of mistrust in politics. We see the lack in trust in debates over what can and cannot be taught in schools. And the public forums designed to work out our disputes and uncertainties in politics and the workplace, where we used to work out these disagreements, they're also under assault, largely as the result of some people who've made a systemic attack on the very nature of truth. So the foundations are weak, and the cement we use to shore up those foundations is watery. To rebuild, we need experts, just like you, who can use their training to meet the challenges of our moment and who can also stand as models of trust and character in their communities. What that means is taking the skills that you've used in class and taking them out into a skeptical world. You are stewards of knowledge now, which means you know how to figure out what is durable and true, and you know the limits of what can be known. Because one of the problems is not only people who are selling snake oil. We've also suffered recently from experts who have claimed to know more than is knowable at the time. So keep practicing the motto of this university, always learning, which means being open to different ideas so you're not blindsided by changing information. Stay skeptical of the latest and loudest and lean towards what your brains know is durable for tomorrow, and not just pleasing in this instant. Always seek to explain why you're doing what you're doing to a skeptical public, showing empathy for those who are confused by our busy world, and stand up against bad information and bad faith. As experts, you are a model, and people are watching. And those of us who believe in the accumulation of knowledge also owe a debt to those who came before us. As I mentioned at the top of my remarks, we are warmed by fires that we did not light and drink from wells we did not dig. We were all bequeathed the witness of those before us who believed in ideas like equity, equality, justice, progress, truth. Those were given to us in trust. And when those values are squandered for temporary profit or power or political advantage, we don't just dishonor our present moment. We dishonor those who handed those things to us, many of them who had to sacrifice deeply. The way they lived their lives made our lives more valuable. And we have a duty to hand off the same value to generations that come after, who will need us to keep the foundations of knowledge strong so that they might have a chance to grow and increase the share of liberty, knowledge, and justice. It's hard to do. There are a lot of temptations to do the easier thing, to squander our attention, to think narrowly and in our own interest. But the last thing I would leave you with is, in difficult times, it's also a blessing, because it invites greatness. The preacher, Harry Emerson Fosdick, gave a series of sermons during World War II that I started reading at the beginning of the pandemic, when I, like a lot of us, were looking for meaning in those incredibly destabilizing times that we didn't know would last as long as they did. Fosdick wrote, "Some eras are like a lullaby, some are like a spur. Which in the end will be greater?" This era, like that era, is a spur. By being here today, you have already shown that you can achieve in difficult times, that you felt the spur and you were up to the challenge. Keep feeling it. Do honor to the version of you who worked so hard to get here today. And in doing that honor, mark today as a day of meaning that will feed you and that will feed the rest of us for your whole life. Congratulations, good luck, and God bless.